Oliver Twist, Chapter 2. Oliver's first job. Oliver was kept in a dark room for a week. He was beaten daily by Mr. Bumble the Beetle in front of all the children as a kind of warning. He was given cold water to wash with. He spent a week in the darkness. One day, Mr. Bumble met Mr. Sowerberry, the local undertaker, and he asked him if he knew someone who would want to use a boy for work. Mr. Bumble also pointed to the £5 reward note. Mr. Sowerberry thought that it would be a good idea to use one of the poor for his own work, since he had always paid the taxes for the good of the poor. The papers were signed, and Mr. Bumble accompanied Oliver to Mr. Sowerberry's shop. On the way, Oliver was crying. Mr. Bumble told him that he should be grateful and that Mr. Sowerberry would look after him. But Oliver said that he was lonely. Everybody hated him, and he asked Mr. Bumble not to be angry with him. Mr. Bumble felt pity for Oliver and asked him to dry his eyes and be a good boy. Mr. Sowerberry had already finished the day work when Mr. Bumble and Oliver arrived. Mr. Sowerberry called for Mrs. Sowerberry, who was an old, thin, disagreeable woman. When she first saw Oliver, she said that he was small. Mr. Bumble said that he would grow, but Mrs. Sowerberry said that he would grow on their foot. She thought about the expenses. She took Oliver to the dark, damp kitchen and asked the girl who worked there, who was called Charlotte, to give him some of the meat that the dog left. Oliver was very hungry, and he tore the meat into pieces with his teeth. Mrs. Sowerberry was watching, and she was thinking about those bills that she would pay for the food. She took Oliver to the shop and told him that he would sleep there. The shop was dark, and his bed was a hole in the ground. The place was full of coffins. Some of them were finished, and some of them were unfinished. Oliver was lonely. He had no friends and nobody to care for him and look after him. He thought that his bed looked like a grave. Watching the coffins everywhere, he started to think about ghosts. And he wished if his bed was his grave. The following morning, Oliver heard a voice outside, and he realized that someone was kicking the door of the shop. As Oliver asked the person to wait, he was going to open the door. The voice from outside said, "I suppose you are the new boy. How old are you?" Oliver answered, "I am 10. The voice that came clearly threatened Oliver, saying, "I will hit you when I get inside." Opening the door, Oliver saw a boy, a 14-year-old boy. He was clumsy and large, and he was wearing a charity school uniform. Oliver asked him, "Do you want a coffin?" The boy said, "A coffin? You are the one who will need a coffin if you joke with me again." And then he said, "I am Mr. Noah Claypole, and you are working under me." Workhouse. Noah called Oliver workhouse. They went to the kitchen to have breakfast. Charlotte served breakfast, and she served Noah an extra piece of meat. Charlotte asked Oliver to hurry up because it was his job to look after the shop. Noah said, "Didn't you hear her?" Charlotte said, "He hurt me, Noah. Leave him alone." And then Noah said, "He is a workhouse orphan. All his relatives left him alone. His father and mother wouldn't interfere." Noah and Charlotte started to laugh as Oliver was sitting in the corner eating old pieces of bread. Mr. Sowerberry found the permanent expression of misery and sadness on Oliver's face suitable for collecting the bodies from houses and accompanying them to funerals. So he decided to train him for the undertaking business. Mr. Bumble came to Mr. Sowerberry's shop and said that Noah treated Oliver as if he was lower than him. Noah was a charity school boy who at least knew his parents, but Oliver was an orphan, a workhouse orphan. All the local shops boys in the area insulted Noah for being a charity school boy, for being so poor. So Noah decided to repay Oliver every insult he received by those boys. The day Mr. Sowerberry accompanied Oliver to a very poor area of the town to collect the body of the poor woman, Oliver discovered how miserable the place was. People were very poor and hungry. As they were measuring the body of the dead woman, he heard her husband talking to a man and a woman who were supporting him, saying that she starved till death, and this was the reason for her death. Oliver and Mr. Sowerberry left the place, and the next day they were there to collect the dead body. Everybody was waiting for the priest to arrive. 4 men were brought from the workhouse to help carry the body. The priest hurried through the burial prayers, and soon the coffin was put into the ground. The husband of the dead woman couldn't bear the moment, and he fainted. They had to use cold water to throw on him and help him regain his consciousness. On their way back home, Mr. Sowerberry asked Oliver how he thought about his job, if he liked his job or not. Oliver said that he didn't like it, but Mr. Sowerberry said that he would certainly get used to it. Oliver remembered all the scenes and thought about the time when he would get used to his job.